From bureaus worldwide, this is FS.
It's the BBG, not the BBC. You're listening to the Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford in Greater Manchester.
Hey, hope you had a nice Easter bank holiday weekend. It's all good here, all good here. Another very nice day in the city of Salford. But it's cold, it's been pretty chilly today. Bit chilly, a bit more like it for April, I believe. The outlook for the week is good as well. I know you don't come here for the weather. I've got two great guests for Tuesday's programme. It is April 14th, 2020. Thanks for joining me. Love having you. You know the Twitter handle by now. If there's anything you'd like to tell me, you know how to do it. Just simply tweet the programme. It's at Richie Allen Show. Tweet me now. Tweet me now, I tells ya.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now, Catherine Blakelock founded the Brexit Party. She joins me, very successful businesswoman, will join me in the second hour to talk about the economic impact of the coronavirus, because it's in the news today. We'll also talk about the death rates. We'll talk about the policing of it. Heavy-handedness by UK police forces, or at least some officers in some forces. Catherine Blakelock. That's been a long time coming. I've been in touch with Catherine for a few months now. And this hour, Spiros Skouras is a journalist I've got a lot of time for. Recently of news, but of course, and the brilliant Sibel Edmonds. These days, he is the face of Activist Post, which is a very valuable online news bureau. Spiro's a top man. We'll talk about Bill Gates, who is everywhere right now, the self-styled health expert. Bill Gates, plus more with Spiro at this hour on Tuesday's Richie Allen Radio Show. Yeah. Bada boom. Yeah. Good weekend. Nice. Quiet. It's the same for everybody, isn't it? What was it like? Quiet. Can't go anywhere, really. We won't dwell on that. On the economy, the UK's independent tax and spending watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility, or the OBR, well, they've been warning today that the pandemic could see the economy shrink by a record 35% by June. The OBR said this was based on an assumption that the current lockdown would go on for another 3 months. And even then, if restrictions are lifted, they wouldn't be entirely lifted. So things are going to be bad. And if you were listening to the news just a couple of minutes ago, you would have heard them tell you that the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, has been warning that the virus would push the UK into its deepest slump for a century. It's not looking good. Here's the man with his fingers on the purse strings. Cliché number one this Tuesday. He's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he is Rishi Sunak.
The OBR is independent of government, and as they've said, this is just one potential scenario. But I'd make 3 points. I think firstly, look, it's clear this will have a very significant impact on our economy, and like common with economies around the world, and it's important that we're honest about that. People should know that there's hardship ahead. We won't be able to protect every job or every business, as I've said. I think the second point is clear. The report makes clear that the actions we've taken, unprecedented actions, will help to mitigate the impact of the virus on our economy, and that
shutting down the economy and borrowing hundreds of billions of pounds to bail out the businesses that we fucked, well, that will help to mitigate the effects of the thing that we did ourselves. What kind? I'm not even going to play it. Here's more.
And that will, if we hadn't done these things, it would mean that things are a lot worse. For example, the impact on unemployment. And the last point to make is it's clear we must defeat this virus as quickly as possible.
I urge every nation and every country to do everything we can to kill the killer virus. Rishi Sunak. Of course, the most prescient point of that bollocks was this.
People should know that there's hardship ahead. We won't be able to protect every job or every business, as I've said.
What?
People should know that there's hardship ahead. We won't be able to protect every job or every business, as I've said.
Yeah, millions of people will be out of work. Millions. That's just in this country. And it'll make the 70s, which I don't really remember, because I was born in 1974. The 3-day working week. Grim days. It'll make the 70s look like paradise. The Great Depression will look like a weekend in Disneyland. Of course, there's only one winner. The banks. The banks. But who controls the banks? More on that as the week goes on. We'll talk about the effects of the COVID lockdown on the economy with Catherine Blakelock in hour 2. I know I said that already, but I'm saying it again. Peter Hitchens is a lone voice in the UK media, writes for the Mail on Sunday. He's a bit curmudgeonly, Peter, isn't he? Hey? Bit one of those, isn't he? Yes, yes. Tally ho. Queen and country and all of that. I wouldn't ordinarily like Peter. But these days, find I have a lot in common with Peter Hitchens. He's been questioning the necessity of the lockdown, but also the liberties being taken by the police and the public rushing to snitch to the police. Now, he was on Sky this morning with Adam Bolton, and he was also joined by the Telegraph journalist Zoe Strimple. Hitchens talks about how to end the lockdown. How do we end the bloody lockdown, Hitch?
I think it has to be done with slowness and subtlety, because the government have created a state of very considerable fear in the country by the policies they've followed, and they can't now turn around and say, actually, it's not as bad as we said it was, and we're going to have to immediately stop all this and everything can go back to normal. It'll have to be done stage by stage and salami slice by salami slice. But I think they really do need to start thinking about it. I think it's costing something in the region of £2.4 billion a day to keep this going, which I think has already eaten up all the 30 billion which were saved during the Cameron austerity period of 2010-2019. So it's extraordinary how much damage is being done. Even Sajid Javid, in his article advocating the free market solution, admits the economy is immobilized and says, though he uses rather grandiose language, to say that we're spending more money than we spent at any time since the Second World War. It's very serious, but you can't get out of it quickly. No government could, and it really trying to work out how you can now say, look, actually, the damage that could be done by a shutdown, and figures of 150,000 deaths have been discussed at the highest level here as a result of the shutdown and the economic damage and social damage it will do, is a real priority for the government, and trying to get a cabinet united on what to do is going to be really difficult, especially with a prime minister who's recently been seriously ill and is still convalescing.
Yeah, slowly. We've got to come out of it very slowly, says Hitch. What about the unpleasant side of all of this, asks Adam Bolton. People snitching on one another. Curtain twitchers turned snitchers. Eh? Looking out your window and frowning upon your neighbour. Of course, that's got its roots in consumerism, but most people don't understand that. What people are today, and I know that I've come to take a very dim view of people. People today, the vast majority of them, the vast majority of people you meet are utterly fucking useless, completely programmed, system-loving consumers. All that matters to them is consumption, consuming. What comes out of that then, of course, is a general suspicion and dislike of your neighbours. Because you see, you find yourself to be, or see yourself to be, in perpetual competition with your neighbours for who has more. And that's where this snitching comes from. You know, you want to put people down. It's just another way of doing it, really. Sending an email to the cop shop, or picking up the dog and bone, phoning your local constable and saying, oh, the guy next door to me has been going out quite a lot. That has its roots in consumerism, in the century of the self, which was the 21st century. I could get really deep into that now, but I won't, because I don't have bloody time. It's 12 minutes past the hour. What do you mean you don't have time? It's your show. It is, but I've got guests. So what about the reporting of people by people, hiding behind curtains? Zoe Strimple from the Telegraph says this.
There's a sort of strange schizophrenia, because on one hand, I can even see my neighbors sort of peering out and noticing when I've gone out, more than once in a day. I'm not even sure if I should be admitting to that. But on the other hand, there's sort of quite a lot of inconsiderate behavior when one's out and about. But I think Wallace was right to pick up on this sort of, people seem to go one of two directions. One is the Stasi direction, and the other is the slightly more or the inconsiderate direction. I haven't seen much in between. I think there's this sort of people are obviously disliking the idea of pleasure, and if anyone having the audacity to enjoy themselves at this time, and obviously a lot of the stuff about sunbathing, Easter eggs, people going to even on second walks, let alone going to their second homes, Gordon Ramsay in Cornwall, all of this stuff is, and also banning Airbnbs for kind of, nice remote isolations. I don't think there's that great medical reasons for that. That's about not wanting people to have a nice time at this point. And I think I'm not sure about that impulse.
She's not sure about that impulse. What does Hitchens have to say? Peter Hitchens. Well, he says he isn't surprised this has been happening. In fact, he predicted this particular scenario.
The problem with circumstances like this, where the state has been given, in my view, an avalanche of panic, extraordinary powers to intervene in our personal lives, the opportunities for the Warden Hodges of the world to interfere are hugely increased. And I'm afraid it's something I warned of us within hours of the Prime Minister telling us all we had to stay at home, that there would be informers, and I was completely unsurprised by it, just as I'm afraid I've been unsurprised by the heavy-handed behaviour of several individual police forces and some police officers. This is what happens in societies where the state is too powerful and the individual is powerless. And I have to say it's going to be quite hard to recover our reputation as a country of free men and women once this is over, given the way that we've behaved. I think there should actually have been more challenge to this. I very much favour the following social distancing rules, and I urge people to follow them. But that's an entirely different point from this attempt to intervene directly in the way in which we conduct our personal lives, even at home and in our front gardens, enforced by officious police officers and by snooping neighbours who, presumably in a society where we had a Stasi, would be happy to become its unofficial informers. It's not shocking to me. This is what happens to societies in which government is too powerful and people are too powerless.
Government too powerful, people too powerless. It's Peter Hitchens, yes. I went to a pet food superstore yesterday, won't mention which one it was or is. Plenty of them around. And I met a lovely girl there called Chloe. True, she said to me, Richie, I live with two of my co-workers. Lives with them. She pointed them out to me. They were in the store as well. Social distancing. Look at them, she said. We walk home together because we live together. And of course, the pet food superstores are allowed or have been allowed to stay open. We walk home together. Yesterday, she said, Easter Sunday, we were open and we were walking home after work. Several cars were honking their horns and people were leaning out of car windows, swearing at us because we were walking together. It's gone very 1984, Richie, she said, hasn't it? It has indeed. So yeah. I'll wait till some evening in the near future when a guest lets me down to explain what I said a couple of minutes ago, which maybe caused one or two jaws to drop, about me not having much time for people anymore. I have a lot of time for humanity, and I would be as quick as the next man or woman to help somebody who needs help. I'm a good neighbour, but I've no faith in people anymore. People are mindless consumers, zombies. That's all they are. And this is why they've basically cheerled their own enslavement. And it didn't begin with the coronavirus lockdown either. So I don't have a lot of time for people. But I go through phases, you know. Maybe it's a bit of depression, maybe. It's certainly not depression. Have I time for this before we get Spiro on? Let's make time. Spiros Skouras joins the programme right soon. Don't miss him, he'll be with me in about 3 minutes. Also on Sky today was Bernard Jenkin MP. Sir Bernard, if you please, the former Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party. He was on Sky to discuss whether or not parliamentary select committees could continue to hold the government to account in the crisis. Now, if you don't know what these select committees are, let me tell you. There are a number of select committees, and each committee deals with a certain aspect of government. Policy, like housing, like crime, policing obviously, health, right? And the committees, the Foreign Affairs Committee, the committees are made up of MPs from all the parties. And their job is to meet regularly with ministers. So a minister from the Department of Health will come and he will sit in front of the select committee and they will grill him. This happens all the time. But we have the coronavirus now, you see. So Bernard Jenkin was on Sky to talk about the logistics of the committees interviewing ministers about coronavirus. The presenter is a woman called Jane Secker. Jenkin starts off by saying that as of yet, the government hasn't agreed to send ministers to appear in front of the committees. Listen to what he says next.
So far, the government has not agreed to that, partly because the liaison committee, as it is called, is not formally constituted yet, and it should have been. But usually, select committee chairs can hold hearings in a recess where it wants to look at the government as a whole and its performance. And I think that's what's been lacking during this long period of recess.
But what normally happens during recess?
Well, we don't normally have a crisis of this nature where a government is making new announcements every few days where there's a rising death toll. I mean, this is an exceptional situation. As I say, I think it's understandable that government has wanted to take a breathing space. But let's be absolutely clear, scrutiny does make things better.
Scrutiny makes things better, says Bernard Jenkin, the Tory. Wait till you hear what he says next.
Proper, constructive, forward-looking scrutiny that is designed to encourage ministers and officials to put the truth on the table so everybody can understand what it is, and then suggestions can be made for improvements. I'm afraid that media scrutiny tends to be a bit too aggressive, in my view. Obviously, Parliament can be too aggressive too. But media scrutiny tends to be looking for a headline, looking for a weak spot. Select committees, cross-party select committees, tend to go in for much more consensual scrutiny and much more in-depth scrutiny that would be looking at things like the supply of PPE, whether the coronavirus business loans are working, whether the bed capacity is going to be sufficient. And of course, there's going to be a huge debate about lockdown, about how long the lockdown goes on for. And part of what the government needs to be able to do is carry the public with it. And parliamentary scrutiny both puts the government under a bit more pressure, but gives the government the opportunity to set out its stall in more detail and for there to be a wider and broader understanding and buy-in to what the government wants to do.
Now, he just said there that the media is over-aggressive in its holding the government to account, in its scrutiny. It's overly aggressive, the media. And it's better, he said, if we allow MPs, politicians, to hold politicians to account, not the media. That's an open goal, that. If you're listening in America, imagine you're the quarterback and you throw the football to the safety on the other team. And you get a chance. It doesn't often happen. But you, as a quarterback, get a chance to tackle the safety who's just intercepted your pass. It's like manna from heaven. All your birthdays coming together in the same day. This lunatic Jenkins says the media shouldn't be scrutinising the government here. We should let MPs do it. Jane Secker is the presenter. I would have been singing hallelujah inside me and I would have destroyed Bernard Jenkin. What does Secker say?
To do.
You wrote in your piece in The Guardian yesterday that there isn't public confidence necessarily.
Fuck off, love. Fuck right off. This is the Richie Allen Radio Show, Europe's most listened to independent radio show by a country mile. My name is Richie Allen, and this is David Bowie. Back in a minute. Right, it's not the best thing to cut short the Duke, but let's cut short the Duke because my guest this hour is very kind, as well as being a terrific reporter and writer and broadcaster for Activist Post. I mentioned earlier on, he's worked for Newsbud and many other credible and reputable online news bureaus. I'm proud to have him back on the programme. But as well as doing all that, he also has his own job and he's cutting into his own time to come on this programme. Just before we welcome him back, want to mention that Bill Gates, billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates, if you believe that, has been everywhere since the outbreak of COVID-19, and this weekend could be seen on multiple UK media channels talking about the need to give 7 billion people a vaccine when one is ready. in order for the world to be able to get out of the lockdown and move back to something approaching normal life. Yeah. Let's welcome back to the programme Spiros Skouras. I will, of course, put links out. Not that I need to. I know many of our listeners know who Spiro is, where you can find him and where you can watch him on YouTube as well. Welcome back to the programme, mate. How you doing?
Hello, Richie. Thanks so much for having me back on. Doing great.
How has it affected you, Spiro, before we talk about what we are going to talk about, the Bill Gates, the Henry Kissinger, the excellent video you put on YouTube last week? How has this whole thing impacted on you personally?
Well, when I say doing great, of course, that is in spite of everything that we're seeing unfold, which is very concerning. Me personally, I am fortunate enough to still be working, believe it or not. I know that millions and millions of people are out of work currently. There's, there's been estimates of half of the entire global population is on some sort of lockdown, at least at some point. My wife is currently out of work. And so, I tell you what, though, it is certainly strange driving down the highway on my way to work, and the roads are virtually empty, and it's like out of a movie almost. Yeah, that's been my experience here. I'm in the city of Salford. I'm about a mile and a half away, a mile and 3/4, 2 miles tops from Manchester city centre. And it is an extraordinary thing to be out running on your own. Not a car to be seen, not a person to be seen. Can I ask you, just before we talk about Gates and the vaccine and why you're so interested in that? I think it's very important. But before we do that, what about the puppet show? Well, it appears to me to be a puppet show. You might take a different perspective on it. You have Donald Trump in the news today arguing with journalists. They're, trying to put questions to him about the US government response. He's firing back at them. It's quite crazy, really. I've never seen anything like it in all my life. Well, what do you make of that? The Trump press briefings and how they descend into, a kind of a rabble of name calling and shouting. What do you make of all of that, Spiro? Well, it is certainly something that I have never witnessed before either. Personally, I don't subscribe to any political ideology. I never have. I kind of just, I think that they're two sides of the same coin, the left and the right. And it's part of the divide and conquer strategy to keep us all divided and focused on, other issues. Meanwhile, we don't see that we're all being screwed over by the same system. As far as Trump is concerned, I have a hard time. I'm always very skeptical, and I know this is very unpopular, but I have a hard time believing that he is 100% legit, like so many people believe that, and he has amassed almost a cult following. They're either extremely pro-Trump or extremely against Trump. Now, me personally, I have a hard time believing that someone gets to that level of power and wealth without playing ball with the system on some levels. Now, no doubt he does have a big ego, and right or wrong, whatever, that does play a factor into this. But ultimately, he has done things that are just continuing the same line. Like for example, renewing the Patriot Act, just one of many examples. This is very un-American, and it just continues this ever-expanding police and surveillance state. But then you see people saying, oh, trust the plan, that there's this secret group of people within the establishment that are going to save us all at the last minute. And I personally have a hard time buying that. I believe that whole movement there is a psyop, but we can't really trust our futures, on one single person or one single idea. We have to, at some point, take responsibility for our own families, for our own futures, and hold those accountable, whoever they may be within, government, whether they're elected or not. So it's, it certainly is a big time distraction. I believe you're right. You nailed it there with these press conferences that they hold on a daily basis. But sometimes some jewels do slip out of there, and I try to watch those closely, as well as other events that are taking place. Brilliant. Spiros Skouras is our guest this hour. We've got Spiro till the top of the hour. Delighted to have him back on the Richie Allen Radio Show. My great friend, I don't use the term lightly, Jean-Anne Crowley, is listening in Connemara on the west coast of Ireland,
all that separates you and Jean Ann is a big body of water there, Spiro. And she's listening in with great interest. And this afternoon, Jean Ann was opining about this on Facebook and about Bill Gates. And most of her friends and contacts came back to her. Their thoughts around Bill Gates, their thinking around Bill Gates is that he's a wonderful guy and he's to be hugely admired. Now, I have to say, in my opinion, I think that would be the standard, I suppose, opinion of Bill Gates. People look at Bill Gates and what they know about him is that he set up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with his wife, and that he has basically given away pretty much all of his money, and that he has done that for the betterment of humanity. He's done it in the best interest of humanity. That's what most people think. And when they see him on television this weekend and he says, I'm going to work very hard with, funding various groups of people to get that vaccine out so we can get it to 7 billion people, the vast majority of viewers, and I mean 99.99%, think this is a great guy. Why are they wrong?
Well, in my opinion here, based on my research, Richie, we have to kind of, go back in history to kind of get a better idea of who Bill Gates is. Now, his father was a board member of Planned Parenthood, which was founded by eugenicist Margaret Sanger, of course, and his mother worked with IBM, who also funded eugenics programs in Nazi Germany. So that's kind of a background, a little bit of who Bill Gates' parents were, to my understanding. Now, expanding on this, you mentioned Bill Gates has, for the betterment of mankind, amassed this fortune and then donated and given it away. Well, from what I can tell, largely he gave that his foundation, his wealth to his foundation, which is basically a tax loophole. So he still retains that money and that power and basically only pays himself something like $100,000 a year, but still he has, billions of dollars tied up in his foundation, which he uses to advance an agenda that I believe is part of a greater agenda that he is basically the poster child of now. Now, when I mentioned earlier that there's other stuff that I watch and do research on, it's events like the Global Vaccination Summit, for example, which was held every year, and Bill Gates was a keynote speaker at it a few years ago. And when I was watching some of these clips, and it was the same narrative that we've seen in a lot of these events, like even Event 201, for example. Their two main focuses are, we need to vaccinate everybody, and we need to silence the, quote, anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
So, that is a big push for their movement right now at this point. And if you look at ways that Gates is spending his money, and people on the surface would assume that this is, okay, yeah, Gates is donating to these great causes like the World Health Organization. He is the second biggest donor to the World Health Organization, second only to the United States. Now, these very programs and institutions were set up by, again, you will start to see a recurring theme, people who can be considered eugenicists. They want to reduce the population. They want to control the population because they see themselves as elite and the rest of us as useless eaters or the workers. So they're better than us, kind of a thing, in their view. So essentially, Bill Gates has amassed vast influence over the medical field, the medical system globally through his donations to the World Health Organization. There was a recent article that came out. It was very interesting, and this is from a somewhat mainstream publication, Politico, and they were talking about, and they interviewed people who are affiliated with the World Health Organization, and they were saying basically, quoting them under the condition of anonymity, that Bill Gates is treated as a head of state, not only at the G20, but also at the World Health Organization. Now, that's a pretty amazing statement right there. In addition to that, his foundation was the first non-country member to be recognized, as a member of the World Health Organization. So, you have all these different countries who are part of this organization, and then there's Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation right there. So he wields vast influence over this. Even some speculate within these organizations that choosing the current head of the World Health Organization, who Bill Gates has worked with in the past, Tedros. And Tedros has been exposed multiple times for covering up cholera outbreaks in Ethiopia when he was leading the show over there. So there's a lot of,
And that is true, by the way. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but just in case my listeners are expecting me to jump in and challenge that, what you said about Tedros is true. The guy is as dodgy as a $7 bill, and it's all there. You can Wikipedia that stuff, and you can find it. Gates might say, though, he's not here, of course. He's never going to lower himself to appearing on a show like this. But Gates might say, Spiro, hang on a second. When we improve public health and we prevent outbreaks of diseases by using vaccines, we are prolonging life. And if we are prolonging life, people will live longer. They will have more children. So I don't understand why you think that, or why you suspect that I might be in favor of population reduction. What do you say?
Well, I would direct, and I do encourage everyone to go back to Bill Gates' TED Talk that he held, where it was Innovating to Zero was the title of it. And of course, Bill Gates is a huge proponent of the climate change agenda, which is a United Nations agenda. Again, you start to see all these same players involved, and you start to see these same goals and agendas involved as well. Now, in this TED Talk, he put up a math equation up on the big screen behind him, and he was talking about how we need to get basically our CO2 levels as near to zero as possible. And he listed a few different parts of the equation that contributes supposedly to this CO2 emissions. And the very first part of the equation was people. And he kind of even joked about it, said, well, one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. And the crowd kind of chuckles and laughs, and he says right there, if we do, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is the best of my ability, if we do a really great job through new vaccines, reproductive health services, and medical services, basically, we can perhaps lower this number, referring to people, by perhaps 10 or 15%. Now, I'm not sure exactly how you lower the population numbers through new vaccines. I'm still waiting for a good explanation on that.
Well, and it's I knew the answer to that question, and I only knew the answer because I follow you and one or two others, great people, John Rappaport, of course, Jeffrey Jackson. I follow people like you. And of course, I went back and cross-referenced it, because as much as I enjoy reading you and listening to you, I'm not going to believe you, even though you're me pal. I'm going to go and have a look anyway, and you wouldn't believe me. I wouldn't expect you to believe me either. And you're right. Gates said that. You haven't paraphrased him. That's what he said. So you are well within your rights to wonder, well, what's wrong with, or what is in the vaccines that might, affect the birth rates. It's brilliant, and it's true, and it's all there if people want to look at it. I was startled, Spiro. By the way, folks, activistpost.com, we've got Spiros Skouras live on the line. He's just worked a night shift and he's here with us today. It's great to have him on the programme. I would go back to something Gates said on Sunday morning when he was on BBC Breakfast. I know you saw the interview. And it's quite lousy, really, that the presenter didn't stop him in his tracks and ask him to explain himself. But they talked about vaccines normally needing a few years and, a couple of years, 3 years, whatever. I mean, we can argue all day long about the efficacy of vaccines. But he then said, it could be done really quickly. But, it would be helpful, and I'm not doing him a disservice, if we indemnify those who manufacture them. And I thought that was a startling thing, really. And he kind of got away with it. I know the presenter did ask him to clarify it, but he didn't really dig deeper into it. He said basically, didn't he, Spiro, that we should basically give up the rights to go after the companies if they make a bad vaccine and basically play a game of lottery and take the vaccine anyway and hope for the best. That's what he said, right?
That's how I understood it, which is absolutely startling, probably beyond startling. And here in the U.S., I believe it was back in the 80s, they already did indemnify the drug manufacturers and vaccine manufacturers against any liability. So if you or someone you know, for example, gets injured by a vaccine, you believe you're injured by a vaccine, and they call this an adverse event. And you want to get compensated for your injury. Let's say you're unable to work or something like that to your full ability. You cannot go after the drug makers and the vaccine manufacturers directly. You have to go through a certain vaccine court, which is, of course, stacked against you. And they have created a vaccine compensation fund to, to reimburse basically, or to pay people who have been injured by this. And that money comes out of the taxpayers' money. So we're paying for the vaccine compensation fund. And so just that alone, I mean, they already have, they can basically do whatever they would like. And I don't want to, and I'm sure I already do sound like I'm anti-vaccine. I understand the ideology behind it and how it's presented in the science, and it could make sense. And yes, of course, it's sound. And when you look at leaders of countries, for example, there was an article, I believe it was from Guardian, that came out a few years back talking about how Angela Merkel from Germany, they were getting what they called clean vaccines, which did not have a lot of the adjuvants, as they're called, in them. A lot of the preservatives like aluminum and mercury-based preservatives like thimerosal, for example. So, when we start to see these toxic ingredients being added to these vaccines, it's very concerning to me. And and then when they try to just dismiss the fact that vaccines, there is a danger there. And like you said, when they're trying to roll back regulations in order to fast track these vaccines through while we're all on lockdown, it's something we need to question.
You've educated me today, Spiro, because I didn't realise that the vaccine, I'm probably going to say it wrong now, the compensation fund in your country, I didn't realise that taxpayer money was used. I would have assumed that the big pharmaceutical companies would have basically topped up that fund, but they don't. You're telling me that Joe Public pays for it, basically.
Yes, and they paid over $4 billion to cases where people have been injured or suffered an adverse event, as they like to call it.
That's unbelievable.
This isn't just some little a small amount. $4 billion has already been paid out. So this is an ongoing thing. It's very concerning. Someone had contacted me recently on social media and said that they had a case that was going through the vaccine compensation fund. I haven't verified this, but they said basically it was put on hold due to this current crisis, just like everything else is put on hold right now. So,
everything else.
Again,
Spiro, you sent me a couple of clips. If you want to introduce them, I've got them on standby if you want to introduce them at any time. I wasn't aware of the conference that you sent me. I wasn't even aware it took place. I suppose when you're a one-man operation, you can't know all of these things. But I've got the audio you sent me, so if you want to introduce it at any time, you can do so.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richie. Now, this first clip, if we can, I'd like to, since we're talking about possible injuries with vaccines, I'd like to start with the World Health Organization chief scientist who admitted, her name is, I'm going to butcher it, Dr. Samoya. They're holding basically a closed door conference, and she admits that some vaccines are causing deaths, and this has led to a lack of trust.
Brilliant. I'll play it now. This is the doctor in question.
I think we cannot overemphasize the fact that we really don't have very good safety monitoring systems in many countries, and this adds to the miscommunication and the misapprehensions because we're not able to give clear-cut answers when people ask questions about the deaths that have occurred due to a particular vaccine, and this always gets blown up in the media. One should be able to give a very factual account of what exactly has happened and what the cause of deaths are. But in most cases, there's some obfuscation at that level, and therefore there's less and less trust then in the system. Putting in place the mechanisms, whether they're cohort studies or whether they're sentinel surveillance sites, to be able to monitor what's going on and report back, and then for corrective action to be taken because unexpected things could arise after introduction, and one always has to be prepared. As we've seen, in the history of many drugs, you've learned about adverse events only after the drug's been licensed and introduced into the population. So I think that risk is always there, and the population needs to understand that and feel confident that mechanisms are being put in place to study some of those things.
Yeah, that was Dr. Suima Swaminathan. That's straight from the horse's mouth, Spiro. There's no denying that.
Absolutely, and many people are not aware of this. So again, I'm not trying to be anti-vaccine, but these are concerns, like you said, that are coming straight from the horse's mouth. And in a lot of these conferences that I've listened to so many hours of, they, like I said, they also point out the facts, how they need to, their objectives, how they need to promote basically their own propaganda, and they need to come up with non-government officials to do so because, believe it or not, Richie, some people don't trust governments. So, and to me, that's kind of where Bill Gates fits into this. He wears the Mr. Rogers sweater. He's got the dorky glasses. He's a nerd. He seems harmless. And, he's doing this for the betterment of mankind. But he is the official spokesman at this point globally, and very powerful and influential. And we haven't even got into his power and influence here domestically in the U.S. But I would like to go to this second clip here, where this gentleman speaking is at the World Health Assembly. This was last year in 2019, and he's the CEO of Gavi, which I'll get into further here after the clip. But it was basically founded in 1999 by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with $750 million of seed money.
For me, one other point I'd say is that we've talked a lot on the panel about social media. We've talked a lot about trying to stop the bad messages. The issue is going to be not only trying to stop those bad messages, but to have positive messages. And it can't just be governments, because some places governments aren't trusted. So how is civil society, how are societal leaders, how can we get a drumbeat of positive information that is there and not drowned out by the vaccine misinformation that's so critical? So in my discussions with social media leaders, that's my request, to be quite specific, is to go ahead and try to stop the misinformation, take it off the air. I remind people that this kills people. It's like other misinformation. This actually has a real cost. It's not a freedom of speech issue. This is wrong information that's killing people.
And this was last year too, Spiro. That was hugely important for people to hear. This guy is basically saying that we've got to stop basically anybody talking about vaccination in a negative way.
Yes, that they basically will not tolerate it, that you're not allowed to ask questions. And people like Facebook have representatives at these conferences, and, they're trying to figure out what's the best way to silence people. And you heard them take them off the air. You're not allowed to ask questions because you're responsible for people's deaths, trying to put this on people who ask questions, which is just mind-blowing to me. Now, that was the CEO of Gavi, which, again, I mentioned was founded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They're part of the Vaccine Alliance, which is, of course, partnered with the World Health Organization, UNICEF, which falls under the United Nations, the World Bank. Other governments are contributing to this, including, vaccine manufacturers. And, so when you look at who else, what other projects that they're involved with, Bill Gates included in this. And we've heard a lot here recently about vaccine certificates, or a global vaccine ID, essentially, to track who has received the vaccines and who hasn't. Well, there's another project called ID 2020 that Bill Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is working on. And if you look at who they're partnered with, it's Gavi and Microsoft and the Rockefeller Foundation and Accenture. And their goal is to have, which coincides with the United Nations 2030 agenda and their 17 sustainable goals that they have. And I believe it's goal 16.9, where they want to have everyone on the entire planet have a digital ID by the year 2030. So now there's a lot of talk going on here, and the same players involved about, digital identities and digital, vaccine certificates. And And when you start to kind of see, hey, well, these programs could easily be put together. And if we see how, and this is my personal belief based on my research and everything, we see how this current system is being imploded. It's being driven into the ground. I believe on purpose, because of these central banks who are also tied into the United Nations and promoting this 2030 agenda. They're the ones that basically are running the show globally. They print the money out of thin air. You know, it's not about money, it's about control. And this is what I believe to be, can be equated to a global 9/11, so to speak. You know, a controlled demolition of this global economy to crash this system and introduce a new digital financial system out of the ashes, which will be tied into everything. It'll be the cherry on top of the international surveillance state. And these chips that they're talking about putting into people, they've already been researching the Microsoft and MIT, for example.
Spiros Skouras is our guest.
And in some countries like Sweden, I believe.
Sorry, we lost you momentarily, Spiro. I want to stay with this.
Okay.
No, I want to stay with this in the time we have left. Sorry, you dropped out just momentarily, and then I jumped in. Because I'd love to be arguing with you here to make a more interesting exchange, but I can't, because I know what you are saying to be true, because I've seen the same documentation. It's there for everybody to see. The ID 2020 heading towards 2030, where they want to be. We've seen cash being slowly but surely eradicated around the world, you know, city to city, less and less people using cash. We've even had warnings from government departments, actually, to be fair, in some countries, warnings that this is going to, you know, hurt people in rural communities. It's going to hurt older people. This kind of vanishing of cash, this all segues or seeds into this agenda. But I want to stay with this ID thing, because Gates said that they want to get this vaccine for coronavirus to 7 billion people. Now, obviously, they won't get it to 7 billion people. And I don't believe that the UK government is going to try to mandate it. But I think you've hit the nail on the head. They won't have to mandate it. All they will need to do is treat it like a passport system or something or other like that. In other words, okay, Spiro, you haven't had the vaccine. That's okay. That's your human right. But you are now severely restricted in terms of where you can go and what you can do. Is that what you see?
Well, absolutely. And this will be basically, like you said, you'll be limited in participating in society. It's a very real possibility. And the reason why it is a very real possibility is because it comes straight from Bill Gates' mouth in these many interviews. And he said many times, things are not going to go back to normal probably ever. And if they do go back to somewhat of a normalcy, it'll be because, basically the entire planet has been immunized. Now, I believe that this is definitely all connected, and it's just as all of these central banks globally are ready to roll out their own central bank digital currencies. Everything has been in work for years and years and years. Now, this new system, I believe is according to their own World Economic Forum documents, states that basically it's going to be run off of 5G and artificial intelligence. So, a lot of people have been talking about whether this is going to be, whether 5G is contributing to this or not or whatever. At the same time, it should be looked into, absolutely. And I'm concerned of the side effects or the health effects in general to this. But at the same time, the United Nations has had a plan since 2012 to implement and integrate 5G as part of this new operating system through their telecommunications union, the different branch of the United Nations. So this is a coordinated rollout, and the timing of it is all coming together and culminating here at the start of this new decade, 2020. And we're only 4.5 months into it right now, and all hell is breaking loose. So they are definitely speeding up the timetable here, from what I'm seeing.
Do you find yourself shaking your head? You're a very bright fella, Spiro. I've never met you personally, but we've spoken enough times on the radio, and we've known each other through mutual friends over the years. Do you find yourself sometimes shaking your head thinking, I can't believe I'm saying this stuff out loud? Because you're bright. You're very bright. You know that for a lot of people, this is crazy. It's like something they saw in a science fiction film. This can't be going on. Do you find yourself shaking your head saying, Is this really happening?
Well, yes, I do. And I also, at times find myself shaking my head saying, how do more people not see this? But, I am seeing more and more people, waking up to this and seeing that, some things aren't adding up here. Something's not quite right, with everything. And when you're looking at, they can't even get the tests right, for example, for the coronavirus, but we're supposed to trust them with getting the vaccine right. That's on record admitted the most, the fastest rushed into production vaccine in history. So, I do find myself shaking my head. And, these tests, for example, that these swab tests that you're supposed to, swab your nose and you send it off, that Bill Gates is promoting there in Seattle. They stated that they're going to try to expand it to statewide level, Washington State, and then national, and then on from there. But essentially, you're swabbing your DNA and sending it off to them, to the same people who want to have a global digital ID, and I would assume DNA databases tied into this. So, there's so many different levels that this is taking shape. And, I think that people really, I feel like I'm not trying to be a fearmonger or anything like that, Richie, but from what I'm seeing roll out, we're running out of time to really do something. I mean, I don't know when is going to be the breaking point. I'm not saying take to the streets and riot, but we got to figure out some solutions here.
I think we do. I don't know. I mean, I've practiced in my own personal life civil disobedience. My listeners know this to be true because a couple of years ago I played some exchanges on the radio between me and the local authority and how I was able to deal with them and basically send them packing, as they say here in the UK. I think large-scale civil disobedience, I think, is the answer, not to be violent. And I know you agree with that. I know you're a pacifist. A lot of people are getting very upset with videos they are seeing of the British police, not all of them now, isolated. It seems to be isolated so far, but maybe it isn't isolated. British policemen acting like thugs, and people want to rise up and they want to meet that with violence. And I say don't do that because you'll never win. Don't do it. Don't meet, you can't become a monster to beat a monster. You've got to think around it. I wanted to ask you, because I know you're not a biologist, I know you're not a doctor, I know you're not an immunologist, but you're a very, very good researcher and you're very honest. And I trust you to tell the truth. Am I right in understanding that the World Health Organization's own, basic medicine, basic practice would suggest that by the time they get a vaccine for coronavirus, even if it's by September or October, am I right in saying that by their own rules, the vaccine should be useless because they've been telling us that most of us will have already had coronavirus and most of us won't even know that we had it? Wouldn't that make a vaccine towards Christmas redundant? Am I right in saying that?
Again, Richie, that makes sense to me based off of everything I'm seeing here.
Yeah.
And it's been floated out there that this may be a reoccurring thing every season, every flu season. And speaking of that and flu seasons, every year, we see huge pushes for the vaccine, for the flu shots. Now, they have yet to successfully predict the next season's flu strain of the virus because it changes every year. But that does not stop them from mass producing these vaccines and trying to push them on the public. They are literally giving them out for free in the grocery stores out here, which is unbelievable to see. You're in the parking lot and you see big signs that say, "Get your free flu shot today." So I mean, this is an agenda that they're pushing. I had also come across a document. I don't have it here in front of me pulled up, but there was a document basically from the CDC and the NIH talking about how to promote flu shots, immunizations, and everything like that. And in this document, I can send it to you if you'd like. They talk about having the media and everything kind of promote and fear and hype to say how bad the flu season is this year and everything like that. And it's amazing when you see this document. I've covered it in multiple reports. When you see this document, it's like a script of how to promote these flu shots and these vaccines, and it's based on fear. And this is a lot of what I believe we're seeing here today play out in front of us.
I want to thank you for coming on. I know there's lots we could have gotten through. Plenty more we could have gotten into about Bill Gates. Remind our listeners where they can find you on YouTube. And I know activistpost.com is brilliant. Michael and everybody there doing a brilliant job of not only putting out your own great content, Spiro, which it is, and I mean that, but you also do a great job of amplifying everybody else at Activist Post. So I really appreciate that. But the YouTube videos, remind us where people need to go to find those.
Well, if you just search, thank you, first of all, Richie. If you search my first name on YouTube, Spiro, Spiro, it'll pop up, Spiro Scores, the channel right there. You can click on it. I personally don't know how long my channel is going to be around. They've taken down a previous channel of mine before.
Yeah.
But I'm also on BitChute, which is an alternative to YouTube. It's spelled BITCHUTE. I have links to that on my social medias, on my Twitter and my YouTube. And of course, you can always find my work at activistpost.com. Richie, thanks so much for having me on. I really enjoy it.
No, mate, you're really good because you've got scarce time to yourself, and I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks, Spiro. We'll do it again real soon, mate. Lovely to have you on. By the way, folks, you can follow Spiro on Twitter. His Twitter handle is @O_Rips. That's Romeo Indigo Papa Sierra. O_RIPS. That's where Spiro is. Thousands of people follow him. Follow him because it's real, sound, ethical journalism. Thanks, Spiro. Look after yourself, mate. We'll talk again soon. Bye for now. The brilliant Spiro Skouras live on the Richie Allen Radio Show for Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. My name is Richie Allen, but you knew that. Listen, let me give you a big heads up. I've been winding up Graham Booth on Twitter this afternoon. I've been a bit unkind to Graham, but I'm just winding him up about being a gamer and a video game. Graham used to present a show called Game Face, and I'm winding him up about that. The transition from gaming to being an expert on geopolitics, but I'm just taking the piss out of him. He's a really good lad. Graham Booth and Hayden Hewitt have invited me to talk about this coronavirus thing, the lockdown, some of the theories that are expressed or explored on this programme. They've asked me to join them at 10 o'clock this evening. That's this evening, 10 o'clock UK time. So, of course, I accepted. Delighted to be part of that. You can follow them on YouTube. It is youtube.com/trigger warning TV. youtube.com/trigger warning TV. Okay? 10 o'clock on YouTube. The two lads and myself will be opining about some of the events of recent days, the policing and all of that. We'll get into some of that stuff for around about 45 minutes to an hour, I believe, from 10 o'clock UK time tonight. I was glad to be invited by the lads. It is 2 minutes past 6. That's what it is. And this is Tuesday's Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford, the city of Salford, which is in Greater Manchester. This pisses some Salfordians off, but I'm sorry, it's true. The city of Salford in Greater Manchester. Here's the latest headlines from FSN, back in 30 seconds.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Simon Marks. The International Monetary Fund says the world is on the brink of the deepest recession since the 1930s. President Donald Trump is again claiming he has the unique authority to determine when different parts of the US can reopen following the coronavirus lockdown. And the espionage trial of Paul Whelan, an American businessman in Russia, has begun behind closed doors in Moscow.
Lovely. Catherine Blakelock founded the Brexit Party here in the UK, and she was the party's first leader. She joins the BBG because it ain't the BBC. She'll be with me in about 5 or 6 minutes' time. Don't miss her.
Renowned healer Mark Bayersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Bayersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbayerski.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
I must mention as well, in case I forget it, that Dr. Nick Begich will be on the Richie Allen Radio Show this Thursday for an extended conversation. Dr. Nick Begich. And then a friend of mine, somebody whom I have an enormous amount of time for, Samantha Baldwin, will be live on the Richie Allen Radio Show this coming Monday, the 20th, this coming Monday. That's a world exclusive for the programme. Samantha Baldwin, who's got an incredible story to tell, will be on the Richie Allen Radio Show this coming Monday, the 20th. Alrighty? Lots to come still on today's programme.
Thanks to you, The Richie Allen Show is the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. Show your support for this unique broadcaster by making a regular financial contribution. Just the price of a cup of coffee each month will make a massive difference. Visit richieallen.co.uk for details.
Bruce Springsteen, Dancing in the Dark on the Richie Allen Radio Show. Courtney Cox in the video and all of that. You remember it? It is approaching 9 minutes past 6 this Tuesday, April 14th. Is it tomorrow? The anniversary of the Titanic. Is it tomorrow? Is it? Might be. Is it the 14th or the 15th as the Titanic sank? It might be tomorrow. What I believe to be, because I love a good conspiracy theory, I believe to be one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated in the UK. I love that story about the Titanic and its sister ship coming to grief on its trials, crashing into a Navy ship and all the rest of it. You know the story. Keep the tweets coming in. Hi to John Stott. How you doing, John? Yes, mate, we can do that, of course. We like Neil. We'll get in touch with him and we'll get him on. While I'm dialing up Catherine there, who is standing by, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with her, while we're dialing her up, just to mention Dr. Nick Begich live on the programme this coming Thursday. And then next Monday, that's this coming Monday, the 20th, we've got a world exclusive with Samantha Baldwin. That's a show you do not want to miss. Just before we welcome Catherine to the show, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, he's been giving the government briefing on coronavirus this afternoon. And a couple of things he said are of interest to us. He said the most important thing is to protect the economy, but to do that, we need to protect people's health. Wouldn't be drawn too much on an extension to the lockdown. They're going to look at it this coming Thursday. It's expected that they will announce a further 3 weeks. They are relaxing things apparently in Spain and in Italy. He did concede, did Rishi Sunak, that the UK could perhaps have done things differently. He would not be drawn on how the borrowing to cope with coronavirus will be paid for. He said he wouldn't talk about future tax policy. He also said today that they wouldn't be able to protect every job and every business. To discuss that and more, I'm really glad to be joined this afternoon by the founder of the Brexit Party, and indeed the party's first leader, very successful businesswoman in her own right. Let's welcome to the programme Catherine Blakelock. Catherine, thanks so much for coming on the programme. You're very welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm hanging on in there. As somebody who is lucky enough to have a home studio, Catherine, with all the mods and cons, it's not been the worst thing in the world for me, but it's driving friends, family and neighbours around the bend. The lockdown. What about you? How has it affected you and your business interests?
It's been very catastrophic for my business. I mean, I run, in this country, I run holiday lets and bed and breakfast, and then I have some rental properties. Obviously, the holiday industry has completely collapsed and has closed like all the rest of the service industry. What is even more shocking is that I was talking to a rental company this morning, a property management company, and they said that 50% of their tenants, and I think they have about 800 properties on their books, and these are all good tenants. These are tenants with working people with jobs who are well vetted, who have good deposits, not on Social Security. 50% of them are not paying their rent from last month.
And that sets in motion a domino effect, doesn't it, Catherine?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it obviously lots of people rely on, all the buy-to-let people rely on rents. There's a lot of them have mortgages. It spirals. I mean, the whole thing spirals. That I have got a plumber I know who is, normally you can't get a plumber for love or money. He's actually a boiler technician, and he said, can I have a minimum wage job painting your fence?
Wow.
I mean, that's how bad it is for people.
Many of these people, Catherine, were under the impression when this began that they'd be looked after, that they would get loans to help them over, the immediate shock. But from what I can understand, listening to UK media and reading the broadsheet press here, they're not getting that help. And many of them, they won't have much of a nest egg to fall back on. People are really on the brink here, right?
Well, I mean, I think it depends. If you are, applying for universal credit, then some of the self-employed are just applying for universal credit. But that doesn't mean that if you're a self-employed one-man band, you apply for universal credit, I guess it doesn't affect you too much. But if you're a business with people, overheads, mortgages, etc., business rates and all sorts of other things, then the government again came out with a self-employed thing on self-employment, but they're not even going to announce it or start to even register it until June. So can you imagine people with massive overheads? I mean, what's going to happen to our pub industry? It was already in severe trouble. I mean, we've already seen, obviously, some companies have just already gone under. I mean, Debenhams, Laura Ashley, Kath Kidson. I mean, I don't know how many, but lots will have already gone under.
And what jobs will there be when the lockdown ends for those staff? Because, again, you're talking about tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people. Let me ask you this. You know what the Office for Budget Responsibility said today. You know what the IMF said today. Mm-hmm. They're saying that we're looking at a shock to the economy that we haven't seen in 100 years. I don't want to do fear mongering or fear porn. I don't want to do that. But you're here obviously as a politician, as a successful businesswoman, as a business expert. What's it going to mean? I mean, what's the country going to look like, in your opinion, in the next 12 to 18 months? People are saying the winter of discontent. They're saying the 70s, the 3-day week. They're saying, worse than that. How do you see it playing out in the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, lots of these things were already there. I mean, Debenhams, for example, didn't go bankrupt just on a whim. It was already there. Lots of these businesses are very stretched. Lots of consumers, lots of individuals are very stretched already. We've had cumulative years of massive debts, people, both companies, governments and individuals on debt. So, this is sort of chickens to roost. We've got pension deficits that are enormous. I saw another 482 pension schemes have gone into deficit. I mean, this is something that could have happened with something else. It could have been an oil embargo. It could have been, some sort of war or some other sort of event rather than this. So I don't see it as just this causing it. I think it causing all the stress that was already in the economy. The problem is they if you speak to, and I spoke to somebody near to Boris's office who's an economist, they plan to print money, and you were talking about taxes, but I mean they plan to print trillions. The problem is that if you print 2 trillion and the economy's gone down 10, it doesn't help you much. It doesn't feel like you've done anything. I think we are going. We've had political crisis before this in many countries. We've got tremendous stresses in the European Union, which we can see between countries. We got loss of confidence in governments before this. So I think we are in a very, very serious position. But we were in that position beforehand, before this. This is just bringing it all out.
There's no short answer to this, but when you described the economy before coronavirus and you said that companies were in trouble, that pension funds there was a huge deficit in pension funds, there's no short answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Was that down to companies being run badly, or was it down to restrictions being placed on companies by governments?
Well, there is an issue with pension funds. Democracy in pension funds often doesn't work very well. There are a couple of big problems with pension funds. The first one is that you have worker participation, which means that you can have the cleaning lady or the painter on the pension fund. That hasn't always been very helpful, as you can imagine. Yeah, it's like me going on the COVID virology board. It's not my field of expertise. So that's the first problem. But the second problem, is this pension thing has not been new. The private sector versus the public sector pension, we've had these, has been growing the differential. And the fundamental problem was pensions were set up at the beginning of the century when people died at 67. They stopped work at 66 and a few people claimed it. They didn't expect people to stop at work at 53 or whatever, 55, as some railway people are, and live to 88. That's the fundamental problem. And it's got so bad, that British Airways, is considered a pension fund with some aeroplanes.
What would you say is the worst thing, Catherine? Just before we move on to talk about the government's response to coronavirus, what do you think is the most... what takes the most blame? Is it the mismanagement of people's pension contributions? Or is it, as you said, things changed, we live longer, we work longer? Which is it? Which takes the lion's share of the blame? As I mentioned this to you on the phone today, as an old socialist and as a trade unionist, I'm going to blame the mismanagement of the pension funds. But then again, I would do. What do you think?
The fundamental problem is this, is that, well, one of the problems is very simply arithmetic. And I'll give you an example of this, all right? Is when we lowered interest rates, and we've got interest rates at effectively zero, this is what's killed the pension funds. And I'll give you a simple example. Okay, if I have a fixed defined benefit, that means I'm going to get £10,000 a year as a pension, yeah?
Yeah.
And interest rates or returns are 10%. I would need £100,000. This is very simple maths, but £100,000. I'm not doing an annuity of anything else, so don't worry about, but I don't want people come and say, oh, the maths was all wrong. I'm just giving it as a simple example. If I'm getting 10%, I £10,000, and I on a simple basis, I'd need £100,000 to produce that 10,000. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
If interest rates and returns are 1% to get that £10,000. I now need £1 million to get the same 10,000 out. Can you see that? Yeah,
I can see that, and
that is your fundamental problem. When we reduced interest rates in 2008 worldwide, and pension funds to break even need around 5 or 6%. When you reduced interest rates to almost zero, they can't get a return. And therefore, those numbers explode. The amount of capital they need explodes. And that's why they're bankrupt. That's a simple answer as to why they're all bankrupt.
It's the right answer, by the way, because when in my commercial radio days, I used to be the Egypt who used to do the financial reports. And I got to understand a lot of this. I would suggest, because I like to be a bit conspiratorial, that this was deliberately done. Do you agree with that, or am I being a bit conspiratorial?
No, I think it was to save the banks and the housing market and all the rest of it in 2008. if we had let things go under in 2008, there would have been an almighty crash and a social revolution, and you would have cleared out a lot of this mess, and then you would have started again. But you can't let HSBC or Lloyds or banks go
Why not?
bankrupt.
Let me ask you this. I love this. I love somebody who disagrees with me on my radio programme. It doesn't happen often enough. It's brilliant. Catherine Blakelock, the founder of the Brexit Party, is live on the show. I'm not an interrupter. Well, I am a little bit, but I'm going to shut up now and let you speak. But I want to say this to you. What about those economists like Steve Keen, and not just Steve, I know Steve's a bit of a lefty as well, who said that bailing out the banks was disastrous. We should have bailed out the people. The people's debt should have been forgiven, let the banks fail, and we would have gotten new banks. Why didn't we do that?
Well, because politicians are scared about chaos. I mean, why don't we let all these businesses go under now? I mean, why are we going to prop up all sorts of failing airlines and ferry companies and hauliers and all sorts of other people?
But you know what? But you know why? Because it's shocking, and that's why you're here. Because you are a successful hotelier.
Yeah,
and the decisions that were made by this current government, decisions that you couldn't have done anything about, and they've put your business and the businesses of your friends and your colleagues and the people you know in severe jeopardy. It could put hundreds of millions of people around the world out of work.
But I mean, there's so many factors to this.
Yeah.
I mean, let's put another way. Let's look at globalization, all right?
Yeah, which both of us are opposed to.
I mean, fundamentally, the fundamental problem is since the 1970s, we've been living above our means as a country. That's first thing. We've been printing money. We've been producing debt rather than living within our means. And the second issue is that the globalization means this. If the average income in the UK is £25,000 a year, and the average income, say, it doesn't matter what the exact number is, but it's £2,000 or £5,000, or it was 2,000 in China and India, and it's now 5,000. There's still a long gap, a big gap, and that closing up has been extremely painful, extraordinarily painful. There's so many reasons why we have this problem. We have a budget. I would argue that we import stuff. We import people who export money. I mean, I've looked at this issue, which not many people look at, but why I think migration is not beneficial. It does lower wage rates, but more than that, if you add the foreign aid budget and you add the remittances that migrants send home, that equals our current account deficit. So we're running billions and billions of deficit.
Out of the country,
And I mean, so it's not one factor. It's multiple factors. It's not protecting. We've got all sorts of, I mean, again, not just on this, but we've got issues with supply chains. I mean, look at the fact that 80% of paracetamol is produced in India, and they decide they don't want to sell it. I mean, didn't anybody ever think that might be an issue? Or 80% of pharmaceutical supplies are in China and India. So, something as simple as a dose of ciprofloxacin, which is a basic generic antibiotic, which costs about 50p, could be non-available.
What are the barriers, Catherine? What are the barriers to manufacturing those things in the UK? Just for our listeners.
There's no barriers, but the problem is that China and India did it very cheaply. And we have been selling off our assets. I mean, we just at the beginning of March, we sold I can't remember which ones they were, but we sold 2 big steel plants to China for £50 million. I mean, they would cost billions to replace. Billions.
That's gone largely uninvestigated because of the current crisis. But
yes, and I mean, but we import 50% of our food. It goes on and on. But I mean, when it's simple things like paracetamol, we really have left ourselves in a dreadful position.
You and I spoke briefly on the phone today, and I meant what I said when I said that. The old left or socialists of yesteryear have so much in common with people who would be bracketed in the centre right today. In terms of these issues, because, we would agree with you. As a trade unionist, I would agree with pretty much all of that. Let's talk now about the death rates around coronavirus. Of course, that's a very interesting area of research. are we seeing more people per capita dying, now than the year before, because that would give, I suppose, a real insight into whether the lockdown was necessary. Now, you've been looking into this. What have you found, Catherine, about the death rates and about, whether or not this lockdown, at least at this level, was necessary? What have you come across?
Well, I mean, the first thing looking at the government's own statistics was up to the data released today, the death rates were unchanged from the average of the last 5 years. Obviously, they're lagging. So we got the first beginning of April numbers, and there are 6,000 more deaths in a week. That is quite clear. Now, the question is, or two questions is, one is, is that significantly worse than an ordinary flu epidemic, or, and I don't know that it is, and we don't know how bad it would be if we hadn't had the closure. But the problem fundamentally is, certain people are quite clearly in high risk groups. The old, it's progressive. The data looks identical to what it would be in an ordinary year, that people over 70 die more of flu. They die of everything more. People with hypertension, people with obesity, people with diabetes are particularly affected. There also seems to be that Asians are particularly affected, but they also get diabetes and hypertension, and they get diabetes at a lower BMI, at a lower weight. So, and also then you can argue, well, how bad would it have been if we hadn't had the lockdown? And we just don't know the answers to this. However, it would seem to be an absolutely draconian measure. Surely, we could have had people who were, maybe over 65. Everybody retired should not be out at all. But when we've got these infinitesimal rates in the younger population, it seems very, very draconian.
Yeah, I know. You've got thick skin. It goes with the territory of being pro-Brexit.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm pro-Brexit. Of course, I would be. Why wouldn't I be? In my days in Ireland, I would have campaigned to reject the Lisbon Treaty and the Nice Treaty. I have no time for the European Union either. You've got thick skin. People will say, "Oh, there you go again. This is typical of conservatives. They don't care. They don't care about the old. To hell with the old. Let the old die. Let the rest of us get on with it." But that's not what you're saying.
No,
you're not saying that.
But I'm worrying if property prices collapse by 35%, and if 7 million people lose their jobs, what is the death rate going to be from that? From suicide, from despair, from drug addiction? There was some analysis today by a Cambridge statistician who's suggesting that the death rate of non-COVID cases has gone up. Well, why has that happened? You would assume that if everybody's staying inside and not being in car crashes, it would have gone down, but it's gone up. So what's that about? Are people having heart attacks from stress? Are people, I don't know what it's about. But economic depressions cause enormous hardship. 30% is these are off the scale. Terrifying. And of course, it's about confidence. If people, the government's going to tell you it's all going to be fine and we give lots of money out and whatever, but if people are scared, they won't buy anything. They won't. Who's going to buy a computer? Who's going to buy a new car today or tomorrow or next week, even if we're out? People will think twice about it. And they're going to carry on thinking twice about it. That bash of confidence takes an awful long time to get back.
That's a very interesting point you make there, because an economist whose name escapes me, speaking to one of the Sky News morning shows, pretty much echoed what you said and said it might be difficult, number one, to persuade people to actually leave their houses. I thought this was fascinating. It didn't occur to me, Catherine. Catherine Blakelock, by the way, founder of the Brexit Party, is my guest this hour. And I didn't consider that, Catherine, that once they say, right, folks, let's start getting out and about again, that a lot of people just won't. And then, of course, secondary to that is what you said, is that people won't spend. It's all supposition, but it doesn't look good for the next few years. Talk about the virus itself, because I know, again, just to clarify, you're a businesswoman, a politician. Like myself, you're no doctor, you're no immunologist. But you've been looking into or hearing things along the lines of that the virus itself, SARS, is that right? Particularly nasty strain of SARS, and maybe not this killer virus that we're being told it is. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I really don't want to. It does seem to be a strain of SARS, and I mean, it does seem that there were very funny things going on in Wuhan. You know, that they were researching this thing. You know, but you know, the other interesting. I really can't comment on that.
Oh, fair enough. I hear you.
But I would ask this, I mean, given that we know that people with obesity and diabetes, and this is very non-PC, because, you know, what we've had is Khan and people saying, oh, you know, we can't, you know, you're not allowed to have fit young women as adverts, but you can have obese people. It's great. It's fine. But I mean, you know, if you knew that if you didn't lose weight, or you know, you would massively raise your chances of dying on this, do you think it would change behavior? I don't know. But, you know, it is a wake up call, this stuff. I mean, it really is.
I mean, look, I'm not
really picking people off in a very unpleasant way. I mean, you have to ask, what's the underlying conditions with Boris? I'm very pleased he's well. But what's he got? Is he a bit, you know, he's a little bit chubby? Maybe he's got high blood pressure. Who knows?
He wasn't in hospital very long, really, was he?
No, he wasn't. But I mean, I don't know. I can't comment.
No, I can't either, but I love to do it.
About the overreaction of the police. I mean, the other extraordinary thing.
Let's talk about that. Hey, Catherine, can I just remind our listeners, thousands of people listening to this in the UK, tens of thousands more listening around Europe, multiple platforms, the Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford in Greater Manchester. Catherine Blakelock is our guest. We're approaching 26 minutes to the top of the hour. Catherine will be with me for another 5 or 10 minutes. Great to have her on the programme today. Founder of the Brexit Party, businesswoman, been talking about the impact, the economic impact of the lockdown measures. And now we're going to talk about the policing of it, because can you believe that people have been so willing, before we talk about the police behaviour in some quarters by itself, that people have been so willing to pick up the phone and say, hey, your woman Blakelock living next door to me, she's gone out 4 times today. Can you believe that people have been so willing to do that?
Well, I think it's part of the sort of, you know, totalitarian left. I think it's, you know, there's always been a very strong streak of that. You know, busybodies and the left would like to tell us, and I'm not talking about the economic left, I'm talking about the cultural left, would like to tell everybody what they have to do.
Yeah.
And it's part of lacking of free speech, lack of free movement, lack of free, you know, they want Big Brother.
And you know, it kills me when somebody like yourself refers to these people as the left, and you're perfectly entitled to do so. I mean, you refer to them as the cultural left, but I went to university in the 90s, and you know, I was involved in various things, like I mentioned, trade unions, the Irish Republican movement, peaceful Irish Republican right. We would never dream of deplatforming somebody. I mean, the thoughts that we've got Catherine Blakelock or Nigel Farage coming to speak to us, the thoughts that we would ban you, I mean, this is just absolute anathema. It would never happen. So it kills me that these people, whoever they are referred to as the left, because I've got nothing in common with them.
Well, we know that we've basically got four groups, really. I mean, it's not left and right. It's left culturally, left economically. It's right culturally, left economically, and right economically and right culturally, and then you have some left who are left. You know, it's 4 parts. I mean, you know. We know that now. I mean, you have people like, just look at UKIP. You had Gerard Batten, who was really left-wing, left. I would argue, say, Tommy Robinson as well. I mean, he's the rightist of the right as far as the cultural leftists go, but he's a working-class lad. I mean, he's going to be left economically, or much more left than Nigel Farage economically. So, you know, you have Nigel Farage is right economically and right culturally. and you have Gerard Batten and Tory Robinson and Le Pen in France, who are left socialists effectively, but right culturally.
Yeah.
So it's an extraordinary mixture. But we have these very crude things of far right, far left. Where's George Galloway? What does he come under?
These labels, and what they're serving to do, I think, is, and it's not happening slowly, it's happening very quickly, it's expedited. We're seeing an attack on free speech that if you'd have said to me, again, when I was at uni, if you'd have said to me, we'll see things in the near future, like somebody will be deplatformed, somebody might lose their job because of something they said in a private conversation on social media. Like Michael Murphy works in a local factory and he's been on Twitter and he's having an argument about trans rights, and he says, well, a trans woman shouldn't be using changing rooms of women. He could end up being declared, to be hateful, and he might even get a phone call from his local constabulary, and he ultimately might lose his job. Did you ever see that coming, Catherine?
Not in a million years, but I mean, I didn't expect to see what we're seeing with this stuff at the moment. I mean, there are numerous videos. I mean, there was of people sunbathing, of people on park benches, but I mean, there was an awful video, and again, to even talk about this video is controversial. Not to actually do it, but to talk about it. There was a guy, I can't remember what his name is. He's a citizen journalist or a small journalist, and he had been filming people at Moss in Bradford who weren't social distancing. And you can guess what happened, right? He had a number of police officers arrive at his house and basically threaten him with arrest.
Even though they were encouraging people to let them know when others were not observing the guidelines.
But it's who he was doing it to, and that is the problem. I mean, and that even if you talk about it, I mean, there are even people who. I mean, this is the other extraordinary thing, and I'll say it. I mean, I used to write for a magazine, online journal called Conservative Woman that has quite a big following. Yeah. And no problem at all. But basically, and it was fine when I was with Nigel. But as soon as I was sort of exposed as supposedly having said anti-Islamic comments, and what I've just said would be probably enough to be construed as an anti-Islamic comment, I'm dropped. I can't write on that platform anymore. My writing's the same. But there were, the Telegraph used to take me, but they won't anymore. So you just get completely blackballed by these people, even if I'm talking about economics. I mean, if I'm talking about Target 2 or the run on the euro or something, it doesn't make any difference. I'm a person non grata, and that's happening all the time. That's soft level closing up of free speech.
Yeah, it happened. It happened to us on this program. Anne Widdicombe is somebody I've known for years and years, and Anne is an occasional visitor to this program. And last year, she was hounded by Stephen Pollard from the Jewish Chronicle not to come on this program again, because I'd in the past interviewed people on the very far right who would have silly opinions about Jewish people. Now, it wouldn't matter. It didn't matter that I certainly don't agree with those people and that I would have argued with them. It was a case of, he's had some nasty people on that particular program, he shouldn't go on. Now, Anne, to her credit, told him to go and do one. But this is the era we're in. And I've worked at every level of the media, and I never thought we'd see that. I remember saying to Stephen Pollard at the time, Oprah has interviewed David Duke, some of these neo-Nazi lunatics. Why can't I interview them? And, isn't the whole point of interviewing people with views that we consider to be extreme, that we can get to the bottom of why they have those views and argue with them? But that seems to be gone by the wayside. It's these days, no, you can't. Apparently we live in a time now when certain views can never be expressed. And I think that's
right
crazy.
Now, Ofcom is removing, and the social media companies have been asked to remove anybody who publishes anything about 5G with any relationship to COVID.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Now, I mean, I've just tweeted it. I mean, I haven't got a clue whether it's anything to do with it. In fact,
neither.
To the normal person, it seems relatively unlikely. But it's madness that people aren't allowed to even say it.
How do you contest that? I mean, listening to you today, and knowing about you, because I've been in touch with you since I think late last year. I mean, if I'm watching BBC 24 or Sky News, I should expect to see you occasionally on those programmes because of your affiliation with the Brexit movement. And because of your business expertise. I mean, I produced before I presented. You'd have been somebody I'd have been ringing up fairly regularly. I'd have been annoying the bloody hell out of you. Right, Catherine, I want to talk about the economic impacts of this COVID thing. Come on and tell me about it. Talk about the European Union response. But because you said something that somebody said was unkind about Islam or whatever, and I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't bother me anyway. Whether I agreed with you or whether I didn't, it wouldn't bother me. But this is where we are. This is scary stuff, this. And not enough people are talking. Peter Hitchens is doing brilliant work trying to get this into the public domain, but they're fighting an uphill battle because the social media giants are loving this. It's a case of, on every subject, there is the right side and there is the wrong side of the debate. You cannot be on the wrong side. You no longer have the right to be wrong. I said this to my accountant is a Jewish man, a very well-known Jewish man, lovely bloke. And I said to him, what's this all about? And he said, I don't know, Richie. He said he said, what has happened to the notion of, you have a right to be wrong. You have the right to, be on the wrong side of a debate or an argument. It is crazy, Catherine. And I don't know what we're going to do about it.
It would be quite interesting to have, for example, Islamists on Newsnight, on Question Time.
Yeah.
It would be really quite interesting to hear what they've got to say. I don't have a problem with somebody saying, that all sorts of things. I mean, it's really awful. I don't have a problem with Holocaust deniers. I think they're absolutely nuts.
Morons, yeah. But listen, but they're in touch. But
if somebody wants to say we live in a flat Earth, or I don't know, whatever, we live in a flat Earth society. I mean, it's the same with Anne Widdecombe, for example, is and many Christians believe that being gay is morally wrong.
It's
but
evil,
it's a view, it's an opinion, and they should be allowed to say it.
But they're
people
not.
Should be allowed to explore stuff with 5G and COVID if they want to.
Do you think in the time we have left? Thanks for coming on today, by the way. Do you think that those who are most vehement in their determination to ban people for their opinions, no matter what the opinions, it could be the moron who says that that no Jews died in Germany, moron, could be him. It could be the guy who says anything. It could be the guy who says something about, like you said, it could be a Christian guy who says gays are evil, which again I think is preposterous, personally. The people who want to ban them, do you think they understand what they're doing? Do they realise that eventually they'll be left, just them, and then it's game over? Do you think they even know that?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, I think the fundamental problem is actually worse than that. The problem is when there are facts that aren't considered facts, or you're not allowed to say facts.
Like a man is a woman, and listen, I'm with you on that. I've had it out. Yeah,
not even that. I mean, facts, for example, that 87% of criminal convictions for grooming gangs are from Pakistani Muslims.
Yes.
Or that we are now in the coldest spring in southern Europe that we've been in for years.
Yeah.
Or that there's no long-term averages. I mean, there's plenty of people who've done all sorts of climate stuff. Piers Corbyn as well has been tweeting about this just recently.
Good friend of ours, Piers.
You're not allowed to say controversial facts, and this is the problem. I mean, this is where it gets really problematic for me.
Yeah, as you know, Catherine, the BBC issued a directive to its production crews last year to say forget about balance on climate change. You don't need to get it. We have the answer. Climate change is real. Listen, I've been studying guys like Ian Plimer for years, Piers Corbyn, going way back, even others, who've demonstrated quite clearly that we're emerging from an ice age, that man-made CO2 is not killing the planet. And yet, you've got the national broadcaster saying, well, we must not allow anybody on to make those points anymore. We live in crazy I don't know what to say.
My argument on this is even something different from this. My argument is this. Warm temperatures, as we know, are nice and they make the crops go faster, as does CO2. How many people will die with global cooling and how many people will die with global warming? And the answer is really clear. The answer is that food shortages kill people and crops grow quicker when it's warmer. And that, for me, is the argument. I don't really care what the science is. I know that more people will die if it gets cooler. And I think we've got, one of the things we're likely to have. The only thing that's oil price right now is crashing and wheat prices are going up because people are fearful of food shortages.
Inflation is going to be something to watch with real, with beady eyes as we come out of this.
Well, I think we'll have stagflation, not inflation. And that's different. What we'll have is things in short supply going up. We saw that with facial masks and hand wash and paracetamol and milk even, where on all the offers disappeared, and we will see things in long supply where you've got plenty of it, oil, hotel rooms, going down in price as people try to get rid of them.
Let me ask you a final question. Thanks for coming on today, by the way, and giving us so much of your time. And this is a very leading, very loaded question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The UK media's approach to reporting on the referendum in 2016 and afterwards can only be described as a disgrace to journalism. Was that an eye-opener for you, that? Or was it something you were aware of even going back before that? Their complete pro-European Union stance, the slanting of the programmes. It was shocking. As somebody who's worked national and commercial radio, and I would have very strong principles about fairness. What did you make of it? It must have opened your eyes, right?
I was just shocked. I didn't think I realised beforehand. I think the shock was that they didn't think they would ever lose.
Yeah.
The Remainers just thought they would win. I was shocked at the academics and all the virulence of these people. I just couldn't believe it. That as we knew that if we had lost, we would have just sort of gone to sleep again and asked for another referendum in 10 years' time and had to put up with it. It was absolutely shocking. It's extraordinary. It's like a religion.
Yeah.
It's a sort of religious ideology, and you just can't get people out of it.
Do you believe we will properly leave, Catherine? Again,
I think the European Union is nearer than ever to breaking up, and this will help it. It's in a catastrophic position with its this thing called Target 2, but the deficits and the stress between the southern countries and the northern countries. Germany's economy is going down the pan. These stresses are really, really big at the minute.
Thanks for coming on today. I wish you, and I know there'll be a lot of people who work, you mentioned plumbers, maintenance people, cleaners. There'll be a lot of people who are employed by you and people like you. I wish you all the very best in this absolute crazy time, Catherine. And again,
thank you very much.
Not at all. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us today. I really enjoyed having you on.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That was Catherine Blakelock. Thank you, Catherine, the founder of the Brexit Party and successful businesswoman, talking to us there about many things, the economic impact of the coronavirus response, the lockdown, free speech in the 21st century, and much more besides. It is 8.5 minutes to the top of the hour. A lot of tweets came in there. Base Ninja is there. What's the Voltaire quote? He said, if you want to know who controls you, just look at who you can't criticise. I think applying that to the situation we're in should be at the forefront, he says. It was fascinating earlier on to hear Jenkin, Bernard Jenkin, the MP, telling a Sky News presenter that the media's scrutiny of the government is too hostile, and that scrutiny at this time is best not to be coming from the media, but actually to be coming from the select committees by politicians themselves. And more astonishing than that was the hapless presenter, in this case Jane Secker, who just sat there and allowed a politician tell her what the media should and shouldn't do in terms of scrutinising the government response, whether that be the government having enough personal protective equipment for NHS workers, whether it be the policing of it, whether it be whatever. It's the media's job to scare up government ministers, run them up a flagpole, inspect them, ask them questions. These are strange times, strange days. And while I've been listening to many men and many women over the years, far brighter than me, who had predicted basically that we would be in this very situation, it's still crazy to me to witness what's going on. It's crazy to me to get a video tweeted to me by Hayden Hewitt from Live Leak and Trigger Warning of police officers in this country breaking down the door of a man's flat because they were told that he wasn't observing the lockdown guidelines. Breaking down his flat door, marching in, mob-handed, shouting at a guy in his own house. And I preach pacifism because I think they want you to be violent. I don't mean they as in the police officers want you. No, the system wants you to respond with violence because that leads to legislation. That leads to martial law. It's the desired response. And I wonder, in our little house, and it is a little house, a lot of people say they've got little houses. One person particularly, and it's not very little, but I'm not going to get into that. We've got a very little house. And I think, what would I do if a police officer broke down the door? How easy would it be for me to practice pacifism and to do as the guy did in the video, which has been seen millions of times on Twitter, which is to tell them to get the fuck out of my property and not pick up a baseball bat. I think I could do it. I think I could keep my cool, you know. It's a police state now, but it was always a police state. There was never any democracy in this country. You live in a constitutional monarchy. That's a very fancy way of saying you live in a fascist state with the illusion of democracy, where you vote people into parliament who then, before they are allowed walk through the bloody doors, must swear an oath of allegiance to that crusty bitch in Buckingham and all her heirs. They don't swear allegiance to you. Eh? They're not swearing allegiance to the people. They're not saying, I do declare this country to be sovereign. I do declare myself to be an employee in thrall to the people of this nation. I will work morning, noon and night for the betterment of the people. No, they swear allegiance to a monarch. Police officers beating people up. Police officers in Fallowfield in Manchester threatening a man who was dropping off some groceries to his mother, who's old, threatening to pepper spray him. And then when an old dear intervened and said, you can't do that, he said, you want some love? This is where we are. I said at the very beginning, and I'm going out. I'm not in a good place with people at the moment. But I'll rediscover my love of people that you meet every day. I'll rediscover it. But right now, I've no time for people. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter what evil lies in the financial institutions of the world. It doesn't matter what evil is at the heart of governance in this country. It wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't achieve anything if the people would get off their lazy fucking arses and come together and renounce material things and say, right, let's have it. Let's fucking have it. But they're not going to do that. At least not anytime soon. I'm going to be on Trigger Warning TV with Hayden Hewitt and Graham Booth later on, talking about some of these issues. I'll be having a glass of red wine. That's the plan. Tuesday night, the Tuesday Club. And the lads have been broadcasting pretty much every night of the week during this lockdown thing. Triggerwarning.tv is the website. YouTube.com/Trigger Warning TV is the YouTube channel. At 10 o'clock tonight, UK time, I'll be with the boys somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. Nice to be invited to speak with them. Only too glad to accept. I'm leaving you with the Smiths. I'll see you later.